This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. A Bimini top provides protection from the sun and shelter from the rain and spray. In this video tutorial, we'll show you how to make a 3-bow Bimini top. Our frame's been mounted to a wood platform, so we can pattern and build it indoors. This instructional video will show you how to make a 3-bow Bimini top. In this video, we will show in detail patterning on the frame, sewing zippered pockets, installing a backstay slit, and much more. Before we can get started making the Bimini top, we need to have a frame to pattern on. If you need a Bimini frame, check out the frame kits at Sailrite in both stainless steel and aluminum. If you have a new frame kit from Sailrite and need to assemble it, be sure to first watch how to build a 3-bow Bimini frame. Then come back to this video to make the Bimini top. You can pick a Bimini kit at the Sailrite website. Our Bimini kits can also be modified to fit your needs. Want to use a different color zipper and thread or a different brand of fabric? Just ask and we'll send you a modified quote including all the changes you want. In order to build a Bimini top, we need to pattern from a frame. We've already erected the frame in a previous video. If you'd like to see how we did that, check out the link at the top right. A long length of webbing will be included in the Bimini skin kits, also side release buckles. Attach the side release buckles to the webbing. This webbing will be used as a means to pre-tension the frame. The webbing has been run around the secondary bow and the primary bow, going under the intermediate bow. Before tensioning the frame, it's a good idea to measure at the center location to see what the frame currently is. Before tensioning, we're at 74 inches. Place the webbing strap at the center location of the frame. The buckle's on the underside. Bill places his hand on the webbing, which is on top of the bow, and then pulls on the strap from the buckle. This will preload the bows at the center position. We're working with a 1-inch stainless steel frame. He will take a measurement again, from 74 to now 73 inches, so we pre-tensioned it by about an inch. Let's release that buckle and show this one more time. Our goal is to pre-tension the horizontal middle position of the frame, but not affect the sides curved area and legs. We know that those areas will come under a great deal of tension when the Bimini top is finished. But at this middle position, it's typically looser at that location. So by pre-tensioning the frame, then patterning while under this tension, we know that our finished Bimini top will fit a little tighter at that location, which will result in a good-looking top. The strapping tape that holds the intermediate bow can be released now. Now we need to position it at the middle position while these bows, the primary and the secondary bow, are under pre-tension. So here again, Bill is using strapping tape to find the center location for that intermediate bow or middle bow. He's loosely strapped the intermediate bow in position in an attempt to find the center position between the secondary bow and the primary bow. Take the measurements from the center location because that's where the bows are crowned. Now that he's found that location, he will strap it more securely at the center location or very close to the center location. The intermediate bow is now at the center position at the crown. Now he takes measurements from joint to joint or spline to spline. And our effort here is not to center that intermediate bow, but to make sure the measurements between the primary bow and the intermediate bow from side to side at the joint is consistent. He's confirmed here that it is, so he straps it at those joints, making sure it will not move. Now he checks between the secondary bow and the intermediate bow from joint to joint, making sure those two sides are consistent as well. If they're not, he'll make adjustments, and if they are, he will strap it securely in place. Now the frame is pre-tensioned and the intermediate bow is securely strapped in place. We are ready for patterning. In the previous video, we already applied our strapping tape on top of the bows, on top of the line we struck on the bows. Now we will apply double-sided tape or seam stick for canvas on top of the strapping tape, directly on top of the lines that we struck on the strapping tape using the Sharpie marker. The seam stick should be applied going past the skirt line by a few inches. Do this for all 3 bows, directly on top of the line that was struck on the bows. We'll need to make 2 patterns for a 3-bow bimini. The first one will be made between the primary bow and the intermediate bow. The Durascrim pattern material, which is included in the bimini skin kits, is placed on top of those bows. Then the transfer paper revealing the glue is removed from the seam stick. Bill loosely based the Durascrim pattern material on top of those bows, but it is not tensioned yet. He needs to first cut away the excess, leaving at least about 6 inches under the skirt edge and 6 inches all around the perimeter. This makes it easier for tensioning the Durascrim pattern material. Now it's been cut to a manageable size. We can now go and start to tension the Durascrim pattern material on top of the frames. Be careful not to stretch it too much. There are scrim lines in the Durascrim pattern material, making it less prone to being overstretched, but stretching it too much can actually stretch the material out of shape, so do this carefully. Your goal is to work out all wrinkles or inconsistencies in the Durascrim pattern material. If you need to make modifications, you can easily peel it up from the seam stick and rebaste it. If wrinkles or hard spots are left in the Durascrim pattern material, they will definitely show up when it comes time to make your canvas top. So take your time here and work carefully not to pre-stretch the Durascrim material, but to tension it appropriately on that frame. We are now fairly happy with the way the Durascrim pattern material looks. It's nice and tight, and most of the wrinkles, if not all of them, have been removed. This is the pattern between the primary bow and the intermediate bow. We need to label it SOUT for starboard outside, and we need to label the center position, center line, and this is the aft edge. Then we need to label it POUT for port out. On the sides, we have indicated where we want the skirt edge to be positioned, so be sure to transfer those marks to the Durascrim pattern material with your Sharpie marker. We forgot to put a center line on the intermediate bow, so here Bill is measuring from joint to joint or spline to spline, and then puts a center line on the Durascrim pattern material, but you must also put it on the frame itself because we'll be needing that center line when it comes time to pattern the other half. In an effort not to get confused, he also marks the front portion of this aft panel. Next, we need to transfer the marks we made on the bow to the Durascrim pattern material. At the corners, he uses dash marks because it's much easier to follow a line along the curve with dashes. Here at the crowned or horizontal portion, he can make a little bit longer lines in an effort to transfer that line that's on top of the bow to the Durascrim pattern material. Here at the corners, he makes dash marks on the Durascrim pattern material. Try to mark these lines as carefully as possible because this will be our pattern when we're done. We will add a 1/2 inch seam allowance here, but in technical terms, this will be our patterned edge. So try to keep it consistent. Do this for the intermediate bow as well. The aft portion is now patterned, and we can remove the Durascrim pattern material from the frame. We'll follow that same procedure from the intermediate bow to the secondary bow, using our Durascrim pattern material. The process for this is the same as what was done for the primary bow and the intermediate bow. So we're going to show this in double time. However, here along the intermediate bow, we notice that we need a little bit more sticking power, so we apply some more double-sided tape. Now, since we're not applying it on top of the strapping tape underneath, we're going to find it difficult to remove the double-sided tape because we've applied it directly to the bow. Because the seam stick was positioned to the forward front of this bow, the angle did not allow it to take a bite on the Durascrim pattern material. So we need to position it a little bit aft of the pattern so that it can hold it better. We also should probably apply more towards the center or crowned portion of the frame because it's not holding as well as we'd like there as well. But instead of applying the seam stick directly to the bow, we should probably put the strapping tape down first, because then we don't have to worry about removing the double-sided tape from the bow after we're done patterning with an adhesive remover. After you're happy with the way the pattern looks, begin to label it, not forgetting to mark the center locations, the forward edge, the aft edge, the sout, the pout. All the labeling needs to be placed on the pattern material. Then you can transfer the marks that are on the bows. This is the intermediate bow, and we're transferring the mark on that bow to the pattern material using dash marks. And here we're using a straight line. Doesn't matter which, as long as you can stay consistent. Bill's doing a pretty good job here. Now he's working on the secondary bow. After everything's marked, we can remove that pattern from the frame. Now it's a good idea to release the webbing strap that pre-tensions the frame. We'll be using that webbing later on, so don't get rid of it. We'll be taking those patterns and now adding seam allowance. We'll start with the aft pattern. Here at the skirt edge, we're using a straight edge to join the two sides together. We do not need to add seam allowance at the sides, but we do need to add seam allowance to the forward and aft edge of this aft pattern. Here Bill is using a flexible curved ruler, which is a 1/2 inch wide after he marks it with a Sharpie marker, and he's following that edge that he struck on the pattern material, trying to match it with this ruler as he goes. This adds the 1/2 inch seam allowance that we need along the forward and aft edge of this aft panel. At the sides, which is a skirt edge, we do not need any seam allowance added there. Now we just cut it out with scissors. That same process is done to the forward panel. On the aft edge and the forward edge, a 1/2 inch seam allowance is added. Here at the skirt edge, we'll join the two lines together with a straight line, and we will not add any seam allowance on those two sides or skirt edges. Using the flexible curved ruler, we are striking a line a 1/2 inch away from the line that we struck on the pattern material, trying to follow its edge as carefully as possible as we go. It too is cut out with scissors. Don't go away yet. Before we move on, we want to show you what these patterns would look like if we folded them in half along the center line. Many people expect them to be perfectly even. They will never or seldom be perfectly uniform from starboard side to port side. Watch here. This would be the case for both the forward panel and the aft panel. You can expect them to be off as much as you see here. Do not make modifications. They are correct. Using those patterns, we'll transfer them to the fabric. This Bimini skin kit came with a Sunbrella marine grade fabric in a Pacific blue color. If you'd like to use a different fabric choice, feel free to give us a call at Sailrite or email us. We're glad to make changes to Bimini skin kits. This drawing shows all the patterns that need to be cut out of our canvas. You can see here at the top, the forward pattern and the aft pattern are laying very close to the edge of the 60-inch Sunbrella marine grade fabric. This will utilize the best cloth usage. Position your pattern material on top of the fabric so it uses the least amount of fabric, and then use the soapstone pencil, which is not included in any of the kits, it's sold separately, to mark around the pattern material as neatly and as carefully to the edge as possible. Here Bill is using a yardstick to try to keep the pattern material down flat as he traces up against the edge with a soapstone pencil on the Sunbrella marine grade fabric. Be sure to mark center positions on the fabric and label the fabric, because the soapstone mark will easily come off later on. We've made sandbags out of scrap fabric as a way to hold the pattern material down. If you don't have something like that, you can use books instead. Half of the fabric has been patterned, but his tabletop is not large enough. So he's positioned the weights at the center location so the pattern will not move on top of the fabric, and then moves the fabric so he can pattern the opposite half. At the skirt edges, all we need to do is strike a line using our straight edge here, because that is a perfectly straight line on the sides of the Bimini top. This is the forward panel. You must transfer the port out to the fabric. This is the forward edge. The center position's already been marked on the fabric, and this is the starboard side. Sout for starboard out. Our fabric has been marked with a soapstone pencil. It's now time to cut it out. You can cut it out with scissors, but edges may unravel. We prefer to use a hot knife. Here we're using the Sailrite Edge hot knife, which heats up in a few seconds and cools down in a minute or so. We're using a ruler on the underside to prevent damage to our tabletop. This will seal the edge so that it does not unravel. If you don't have a professional hot knife like this, you could use a wood-burning tool or a soldering gun. At the center mark, place a notch in the fabric going no deeper than 1/4 inch with the hot knife. This is the forward panel, and this is the aft seam or center seam, so Bill marks it so he won't get confused later on. That panel is now patterned. There should be plenty of fabric in the kit. Here we're moving the fabric down so that we can now pattern the aft panel. We'll place our sandbags on top of the pattern material to keep it firmly in place, and then pattern around it, marking the Sunbrella marine grade fabric with our soapstone pencil. We're following the same exact procedure that we did with that first panel. Here we're marking center positions, and we've traced all around it, so we mark pout for port out, and we'll mark the other side sout for starboard out. We'll mark the forward edge and the aft edge, and then we will cut it out with the Sailrite Edge hot knife. If there is excess fabric at the bottom edge of this panel, do not cut directly across it, but actually stop where the panel stops, because we may need to use it for tails or pockets in a later step. Speaking of pockets, that's coming up next. Here you can see we're using some of the fabric that was left over at the top edge of one of the panels here. We're placing our aft panel on top of that scrap fabric. Before you pattern this edge for a future pocket, be sure you have enough fabric at the opposite end. Here we do. We'll position our weights on top of that panel that we patterned and cut out earlier, and then we'll trace the aft edge here. This will be a future pocket with a zipper. We trace the side of it going back at least 6 inches, and now we'll trace this forward edge with the soapstone pencil. This sleeve, when finished, will be 6 inches wide, so he's left enough material behind this portion where he's marking so that he can create a future 6-inch wide sleeve. Notice how we don't have a very large table, and you can do this too. Keeping those weights on top of the pattern and moving our fabric to opposite ends of the table will still make it possible for us to pattern. Here along this opposite side, he's marking up at least about 6 inches or so. Then don't forget to mark the pocket with pout, center position, and sout. That forward edge is now patterned. We can remove that Bimini top panel, and now we need to measure back 6 inches. Before we do that, we need to go back to our frame. The pocket will have a different release point along the crown compared to the skirt edge, due to the angle and curve of the bow at those locations. Here's a quick illustration of what we'll be doing next. We will use the differences in these measurements when it comes time to pattern the bows. This probably seems very confusing, but it won't be after we show you exactly how to do it. You can do this on the primary or secondary bow, it doesn't matter. We'll take a length of string and tape it to the middle position of the primary or secondary bow and mark on the string with a permanent marker that line that we used when we patterned. Then directly underneath that bow, we will mark the string with a permanent marker there. This is the exiting point for the pocket. The exiting point along the horizontal portion of the frame will be different than the exiting point of the pocket at the sides of the Bimini. So now we're going to go to the side of the Bimini where we marked for the skirt line. Using that same string with the first mark that we marked on the seam line. We'll position it on the seam line on the side of the bows at the skirt line and tape that into position. So the first mark is the seam. The pocket will then go horizontally from this location. So Bill will hold the line horizontal, and he will actually run the length of the line back to the skirt line on the primary bow. Now, if you were working from the primary bow, you just run it back to the secondary bow, skipping the intermediate bow and then sticking it to the skirt location there. Now, there's double-sided tape there, so it actually sticks pretty well, but he's also going to tape it at that location as well. At the side, the pocket will exit a little bit differently than it was at the middle position horizontally. Here's the midship position, and he marks it with a Sharpie marker there. So this is where the pocket will exit on the sides with the line held horizontal there. Now that distance there will vary depending on the angle of the bow, so make sure you do this for your bows because the 5/8 measurement that we got may be different for you. Now keep that string because we'll use it when we create the pocket, so we're going to remove it from the frame. Next, you need to determine where the curve on the side starts. So here a tape measure has been placed at the center location, either on the primary or secondary bow. It doesn't matter which one. And then we measure to where the curve begins. For us, it's around 38 inches. Your measurement may be different. Going back to the pocket that we just patterned, at least the forward edge of that pocket, we will measure from the center position of that pocket all the way to the measurement we just took on the frame. For us, it was 38 inches. This is where the curve begins. We'll strike a mark at that location along the line that we patterned earlier. At the ends of this pocket, we need to cut off 2 inches. So we've used this straight edge up against the line that we marked, about 6 inches or higher from the patterned edge. And that ruler is 2 inches, so it makes a perfect 2-inch mark 2 inches in from the end. Don't cut it off yet. Take the string that we used on the frame, position the mark we made on the side at midship along the pattern line of the pocket at the new 2-inch cutoff mark we just made. Then place a mark at the marked position we took at the middle of the Bimini frame that was directly under the frame. This mark is about 5/8 inch away from our pattern line for our Bimini pocket or sleeve creation. Using a flexible curved ruler, we will strike a new line starting from where the curve begins on our frame. For us, it was 38 inches. Yours will likely be different. This curved line will follow the general shape of the one patterned, but instead we will go to our new mark we just made, so it will gradually get wider from the 38-inch location to the new mark. So we've completed this now for the starboard side of the pocket. Now we need to do that on the port side of the pocket, following the same procedure, measuring from the center to the curved position, and then adding the excess to the width of our pocket at that end. Here it is already done. We didn't show that. Now we're using the Sailrite edge hot knife to cut out the bottom edge of our pocket. Notice that we're cutting on this new line that we just struck down, the new curve I should say. And we'll cut along that edge all the way to the port side here. We still have not measured back 6 inches for the pocket's width. We need to mark the center location just like we did with any other panel, and we did that with the Sailrite edge hot knife. We'll extend the pattern line out a little bit further past our cutoff point so that we can gauge drawing a line perpendicular to it. Notice that we are not perpendicular to the line that we extended out, for us 5/8 inch. We're actually following the line that we struck on the fabric from our Bimini top fabric. To mark this line, which is 6 inches from that edge, now, we're on the edge actually now, we're using the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler with a soapstone pencil. The Sailrite canvas patterning ruler has a metal end that you can ride up against a cut edge to create a line a certain distance from a cut edge. For us, this distance is 6 inches. Here again now we've reached the starboard side, and notice that we are following the line that was struck down with the Bimini top material, not the new line that for us was 5/8 inch wider. 6 inches perpendicular to that edge. Now here we did not extend the line, and watch what happens. If we actually take a tape measure after extending that line, you can see that we are not being accurate. And this is important to be accurate. So here we extended the line, and now we actually take a tape measure and measure up perpendicular 6 inches. This is another way you could strike a line instead of using the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler. You can actually use a tape measure and measure up perpendicular from that line and place marks every few inches. Then you can strike a line between the marks. So had we not extended that line, you can tell we are off by, looks like a 1/2 inch or so, or 3/8 inch. So it's a good thing we did that here, because this will actually be our cut line, not the line on the outside. Now we can cut the rest of this pocket out using a hot knife. We're cutting along the 2-inch line we struck in from the edge 2 inches. And now we'll follow that edge that we struck 6 inches perpendicular from the patterned edge. This is our pocket for the aft panel. We need to follow this exact same procedure for the forward panel. Because it's done in exactly the same way, we're going to go through that rather quickly. We don't have to go back to the frame to make a new string. We'll use that same string with the 3 marks for the forward panel as well. We're trying to use up the scrap fabric that was left over from the forward portion of one of our panels and trying to determine whether or not it's long enough. It is. We're going to cut off the excess because we'll need that for other procedures as well. And we've laid up this forward panel on top of some scrap fabric, and we'll trace around it, going up the sides by at least 6 inches or more. In lieu of extending the line later on, we've extended it here, though Bill didn't do a very good job, so he restrikes it here. As with any panel, this pocket or sleeve needs to be labeled. So here, this is the starboard side, sout. Here's the center, and then this is the forward edge, and this is pout for port out. He'll extend that curve here with the flexible ruler so that we can follow that curve when we mark 6 inches up from this edge, because this too will be a sleeve or a pocket. And we need to mark the 2-inch location inward of each edge. We're using this ruler, which is 2 inches wide, to create that mark. And then we'll use that same string we used earlier and measure back that distance to extend the sides of our pocket to account for the pocket release on the sides. Then we find the position that from center position where the curve begins. For us it's 38 inches, and using the flexible ruler create our curved edge that extends it out 5/8 inch from the patterned edge. Our measurements were taken from the frame we erected. Your measurements may be completely different depending on how the frame was erected. We'll make those same marks on the opposite end of this pocket. This is the port side. We need to do that to the starboard side as well. Here we're showing using a ruler or a tape measure to measure perpendicular from the edge. And we need to follow that patterned edge, not the one we just struck down. So here we're marking 6 inches every few inches using this flexible tape measure that is perpendicular to that struck down line, all the way to our 2-inch cutoff mark right here. Then we'll join those lines together with a soapstone pencil, and then we will know where to cut the trailing edge of our pocket, which is now 6 inches wide, following the pattern. After this is done, we can cut it out with the Sailrite Edge hot knife. We will not be showing that since it's done exactly the same way we did with the other pocket or sleeve. Now for the center pocket, it will only be 36 inches wide. So from the center location on the aft panel, this is the forward edge of the aft panel, measure over 18 inches from the center location, so that your measurement, if measured at the center, would be 36 inches from mark to mark. Again, we're going to use this aft panel, the forward edge, as a pattern to make our intermediate pocket. So we've taken some scrap fabric that's at least 6 inches wide or wider, because we're not using the entire width of that fabric, and we are tracing that forward edge because it does have a little bit of shape in it. It is not a perfectly straight edge. Here's our center location, so we want to mark that so we don't lose it. You will mark CL for center location, and we also need to mark SOUT for starboards out and POUT for port out on that scrap fabric underneath, which will become our intermediate or middle pocket. The process for making this pocket 6-inch wide is fairly easy. It's not like the other two pockets. So we're going to measure from the edge that we marked, 18 inches from center or 36-inch edge, 6 inches up and strike a line. We'll do the same thing on the opposite side. Using a straight edge, we'll strike a line at that location on this fabric. Using the clear acrylic ruler, we will place it along the line we just struck down, so it's 90 degrees from that line, and strike a line down the side. This will make that pocket a little bit shorter than 36 inches on the edge that has some shape. Bill's going to mark seam here because this is the edge that will be sewn. And then we'll cut it out with the Sailrite edge hot knife. Don't forget to cut in about 1/4 inch at the center line location with the hot knife. The next chapter will show making a tuck-down tail. However, you do have some choices in this, and first we're going to discuss the different types of tails. We're going to concentrate next on the tails. Here you'll notice a hang-down tail, and the second one down below is called a tuck-down tail. It utilizes 2 canvas pieces. Here on our finished Bimini, this is the tuck-down tail. It does not easily pull open, so it would not be good for an extension panel. Here on the other side is a hang-down tail. It looks pretty good, but notice if we pull it at the corner, it actually opens up fairly easily, so you could add an extension panel to it. A tuck-down tail basically tucks down and a little bit back, whereas a hang-down tail simply just hangs down loosely. For our Bimini, we're going to make a tuck-down tail for the forward portion of our Bimini. So this is the forward panel. Because our scrap fabric is rather small, we've laid the assembly on the floor so we can determine whether this forward panel will fit on the scrap fabric, and it does. We've marked up the side about 3 inches, then we'll trace the forward edge, being sure to label the center and to also label it SOUT for starboard out and POUT for port out. The reason we're putting a tuck-down tail on the forward panel is mainly so we can show the process in case you want to choose to do that tail, and also because we do not plan on adding an extension from the forward panel to a dodger later on. Okay, we've cut out the front portion where we patterned with the Sailrite edge hot knife and are now patterning up 3 inches from the edge perpendicular to that edge with the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler. One thing we forgot to mention, leave the ends of this tail long by 1 inch or 2. You may need that extra fabric. Now we'll cut along that line that we just struck down 3 inches up from the patterned line with the Sailrite edge hot knife. The tuck-down tail requires 2 thicknesses of a tail to make it rather stiff, so we'll use the first one we cut out as a pattern for the second. A little bit later on we'll be showing the hang-down tail. It is much easier to create a hang-down tail. It's simply a rectangle that is 6 inches wide by the length of that side plus a few inches. So the process for a tuck-down tail, as shown here, is obviously a little bit more complex because we make tails that match the shape of the edge that they will be sewn to. After tracing around the first layer, we can cut the second layer, matching that first layer. Be sure to label it as well. On most Biminis, the hang-down tail is the one most frequently used on both the forward and aft edge. That's what we're going to do next. We've decided to make a hang-down tail for the aft panel. Later on in the future, we may make an enclosure that extends beyond the aft panel of this Bimini. That's why we'll put a hang-down tail there. We folded that panel in half to find its measurement along one edge. It was 50 inches. We need to multiply that times 2 and add about 4 to 5 inches extra. So we'll make a rectangle that is 6 inches wide by about 104 to 105 inches, because that's the length of the edge plus a few extra inches. The clear acrylic ruler available from Sailrite is 6 inches wide, so it's perfect for making this rectangle. We'll use a soapstone pencil and mark the Sunbrella marine grade fabric. We'll be cutting this out later on with the Sailrite edge hot knife. Why not pattern on that same piece the facing strips? That's next. Facing is a strip of fabric that's sewn on the inside of the bimini. It reinforces the edge, and it's also a future point to possibly attach curtains if so desired. We're going to go back to our frame here and get a measurement from the skirt line on the primary to the secondary bow. It's 59 inches. We'll now make facing strips. We're going to put it on that scrap fabric that we just made for the hang-down tail here, so it's right above the hang-down tail. In here we're going to make it a few extra inches longer. We measured 59, so I think we made it 62 here. These facing strips will be 3 inches wide. Here we're using the clear acrylic ruler and making a rectangle 6 inches wide, and then we'll strike a line 3 inches in the middle. This will make 2 strips of facing that equals the sides of our bimini on the port and starboard side. Now we'll cut all that out with the Sailrite edge hot knife. Here we're cutting out the hang-down tail and the 2 facing strips. Our sunbrella is cut out and everything is ready for assembly. Here's what you should have. Before we do anything else, we're going to apply binding to the sleeves or pockets. That's next. Next, we will sew binding on the pockets or sleeves. Binding will be sewn to the forward and aft pockets, concave side, and the 2 small ends. It'll also be sewn to the straight side of the intermediate pocket and its 2 small ends. Sailrite Bimini skin kits come with 1-inch sunbrella binding. Here we're testing it on some scrap canvas to make sure that our stitch tension is appropriate. When setting tension, what we want the knot to be pulled up into the bottom side of the fabric. But if there's any leeway, we want that knot to be on the bottom rather than on the top. You see, it's important not to have too much upper tension, as that will increase more puckering down the length of the seam. Also, sewing with the longest stitch length is recommended, as this too reduces puckering. Now, with that said, when I sew binding, I typically increase the tension so the stitch looks great on the top side and excellent on the bottom side. But then when I go to sew just basically 2 layers of the fabric together, then I reduce the tension so the knot is just slightly on the underside, so I don't get as much puckering. But when sewing binding, it's not nearly as fickle. So here we've sewn one of the sleeves, or sometimes referred to as pockets. We do reversing at the beginning and the end to lock our stitch in place. This is on the concave portion of one of the pockets. Always check your binding to make sure that it is not kinked up before it gets to the binder. Now let's talk about how he's feeding the fabric assembly in the 1-inch swing away binder. Notice that he's concentrating on the exiting point of the binder. It's important to push the fabric into the binder at that location rather than the entry point of the binder. The entry point is slightly curved inward to make feeding of the binding easier. But that inward curved design of the binder, which helps to feed the binding without kinking, is also your enemy, because if you push the fabric up there and concentrate on the entry point, your fabric will not be pushed well into the fold of the binding. So now here he's sewing on the short ends, a piece of binding there, doing reversing at the beginning and also at the end. We're sewing this bimini top with the world-famous Sailrite Ultrafeed walking foot sewing machine. This is the LSZ1, and we're set up in the collapsible sewing table for the Ultrafeed. Our last pocket is the intermediate pocket, and we are going to sew binding on the straight edge of that. We mark the bottom edge seam. We will not sew binding on there. We will sew it along the straight edge and the 2 short ends. Notice that when he does reversing here, the binder will actually walk backwards slightly. So you don't want to reverse in long distances because that will make the stitch wander to the right. So just reverse less than an inch or so at the beginning and the end of your stitching. Then when we're done cutting the binding on the ends, use the Sailrite edge hot knife or something similar to seal the ends of the binding. Now is a good time to apply the zipper to the intermediate pocket, or sometimes called sleeve. Notice that pocket is facing with the writing the pout and the sout facing up, and he's marked where he wants to apply the basting tape to this flange of the zipper. This is a 36-inch zipper, so that's what we'll apply to the intermediate pocket. We apply basting tape to that side of the flange. Notice the slider's polar is facing up. Using the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler, we apply pressure to the basting tape, adhering it very well to the zipper's flange. Now, it's easier to apply it with the zipper on the table, so to turn the pocket so the writing, the sout and the pout, is facing down, and then he matches up the end of the starter box, and the teeth are even with the binding that's been sewn on the straight edge of that pocket. So here's what your intermediate pocket should look like after the zipper's been basted in place. We'll place the zipper's teeth right up against the right side of the presser foot and move the needle bar closer to the teeth so it's moved to the right as well. Then we'll sew down the zipper's length, keeping that foot as close to the teeth as possible as we sew. To secure the stitches well at the beginning, be sure to do some reversing. When we reach the other end, the slider's going to get in the way. So what Bill's going to do here is he's going to sew up to that slider until it starts to impede with our sewing, and do a little bit of reversing here because we're very close to the end. These are locking sliders, so the only way to move the slider is to actually engage the polar, which disengages the lock on the teeth. So it's a little bit hard to get past the presser foot. So he lifts the foot after doing some reversing without cutting the stitches, and he grabs the slider's polar and pushes it back away from the presser foot. Then he will sew to the end and do more reversing. We need to use the intermediate sleeve here when we sew the two halves together, the aft portion and the forward portion. We will sew the zippers on the other sleeves later on. It's now time to join the forward and the aft panels together. Before we start assembling panels together, it's not a bad idea to take some paper and make a representation of the panels and the sleeves and the tails, as we've done here, and mark them pout, sout, forward and aft edges. Then we can lay them together as they would respectively be sewn together and staple them in place. We'll start by joining the forward and aft panel or pattern and the intermediate sleeve. The aft panel is on the bottom side with its markings facing up. The forward panel is on top of that with its markings facing down. And then the intermediate sleeve with its markings facing up is on top of all of them. Now we'll staple them together along the center line where they will be seamed together. Upon stapling those three sections together, here's what the mock-up will look like. This is the outside surface, and this is the underside surface, and the intermediate pocket will fold back like this. Next, to attach tails and sleeves, or pockets, have the bimini laying up, so the markings are facing up. And then the tail will go on next along its respective edge. Then the pocket or sleeve on top of the tail. Make sure that sout and pout are all on the same side of the top. Then attach, for us, the aft tail first, then pocket. Markings are all facing up. There we go. There's our mock-up. Now it may look a little strange, but when you fold the sleeve back and the tail back, the tail will stick out and the sleeve will be sewn to the underside of the bimini top. Next, we're going to sew the two halves together, the forward and the aft panel. The aft panel is laying on the table with its outside surfaces facing up. The forward panel is on top with its outside surfaces facing down. In other words, outside surfaces are facing each other. The intermediate sleeve we just finished up will be laying on top of all of those with its writing facing up. You're going to notice something right off the bat. The intermediate sleeve or pocket does not have binding sewn on, nor does it have the zipper sewn on that we just did. That's because we got a little bit eager here and we wanted to join the assemblies together and we forgot to do that. So ignore that fact. Yours would have binding sewn on and the zipper sewn on. Be sure all the markings are facing on the right side. Port is on port for all the panels and the pocket, and sout is on sout for all the panels and the intermediate pocket. So this is how panels will be basted and sewn together. But first we need to apply seam stick for basting tape along the edge of one of the panels. So Bill folds the forward panel back and also the intermediate sleeve, and now he applies basting tape to the aft panel's edge. This is the forward edge of the aft panel. Sunbrella marine grade fabric is very stain resistant, dirt resistant, and water resistant, and because of that, seam stick does not stick very well to it. So using a heavy object or the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to apply pressure to the seam stick will help it stick better to the fabric that doesn't really like anything to stick to it at all. That's the way it's designed. We didn't show it, but we folded the forward panel forward again. And now he's marking on the forward panel the location for the intermediate sleeve. So onto that forward panel's aft edge, he applies the basting tape at the location where the intermediate sleeve should be basted down. Notice at the center location he's breaking the seam stick into two halves. That's because he'll baste a half portion of each one of these panels together first, then take it to the sewing machine and sew the half of it, because basting the entire length of that edge sometimes comes unbasted as we take it to the sewing machine and sew. So doing only a half of it at a time from the center location out will help it to stay stuck well. Be diligent to line up the edges perfectly as you baste it in place. When you get to the ends where there's a lot of shape, you'll have to carefully baste the edges together and be careful not to include any wrinkles when you get to those ends, because there's a lot of shape on the end. Watch here as Bill does it. You can see the seam is laying nice and flat, but there's a lot of wrinkling in the fabric, obviously because of that shape beyond the seam. And you'll see a little bit of a dog ear at the end. That is completely expected and normal, so don't change anything just because you see a dog ear like this. That is our 1/2 inch seam allowance. It's very important to apply pressure on top of that basted area. Again, we're using the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to do that here. If you don't have that, you can use something similar to apply pressure while still not hurting the fabric. And now we'll take the intermediate pocket. Remember, yours will have binding and a zipper sewn to it. And on the edge that's marked seam, we will seam it starting at the center location, and we'll seam only a half portion of it, making sure that its edge, which does have a little bit of shape in it, matches the edges of the panels laying under it. Notice the writing is facing up. In an effort to take this to the sewing machine without anything coming apart, we're going to use a spring clamp and place it on the end that is not yet basted right at the center location. We're going to use the Deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide and place it on the 1/2 inch line of the sewing machine. If your needle plate does not have a marking like the Sailrite Ultrafeed does, you would have to measure over a 1/2 inch from the needle. Make sure the forward and outer edges of the feet of the Deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide are not on top of the needle plate, otherwise it may move while you're sewing. When you're sewing the stitch, be sure to only utilize as much tension as necessary to make the bottom side look fairly good. If anything, it's better to have the bottom side a little bit loose rather than the top side. Here we're starting at the center position and sewing on the side that is basted 1/2 inch from the raw edge of the fabric. And the Deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide is used as a table saw fence would be used to keep that stitch consistently 1/2 inch from the edge. When Bill reaches the curved portion, there's a lot of shape here, so he's trying to be sure that he does not sew an accidental wrinkle on the bottom panel. So he's making sure that the fabric that is going to be sewn is laying nice and flat. And he diligently works to keep that fabric up against the Deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide. If you don't have the Deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide, you can use masking tape on the bed of your sewing machine as a guide to keep that stitch a 1/2 inch away. Now we've taken it back over to the table and we'll peel off the transfer paper of the double-sided tape, revealing the glue, and baste the other half, just as we did the first half. The first half is sewn in place, so we don't have to worry about it moving. When we reach the end, there's a dog ear. That is expected. And now use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler or something similar to securely hold the basting tape in place to this umbrella marine grade fabric. Now we baste the other side of the intermediate pocket. Let's move on and show sewing the other half. Bill positions the assembly so that it's right over the halfway point. You can see that notch indicating the halfway location. He does some reversing here over top of our previous stitches and will sew down the other side, just as he did when he sewed the first side. The intermediate pocket would have binding and a zipper put on it, just like we discussed earlier. The opposite panel is now facing up, so the excess fabric is not underneath our assembly when we reach the curve, it's on top. So now he can easily work to make sure that he does not sew any excess wrinkles in as he sews a 1/2 inch from the raw edges of the fabric assembly. When the end is reached, do some reversing. That's the first stitch of a semi-flat felled seam. Next up, the top stitch. When we sew the flange that's a 1/2 inch on the bottom side, we want that flange to go towards the aft panel or away from our intermediate sleeve. So the top stitch is sewn onto the aft panel as it faces up. And he will do some reversing at the beginning to lock his stitch in place. His goal here is to keep the stitch an 1/8 inch away from the splayed open part where he first did his sewing, and to pull the panel apart as he sews, keeping that stitch consistently away from the fold because this stitch will be visible. This is called a semi-flat felled seam. Notice here, he buried the needle by rotating the balance wheel by hand so he can make adjustments to the fabric. Now he can continue to sew, knowing that his needle or fabric assembly did not move on him when he made the adjustments. Here again he's buried the needle and he's adjusting the fabric so it'll fit under the arm of the sewing machine. Then he can continue to sew. Your primary job of this top stitch is to ensure that the stitch is nice and straight because it will be visible on the outside of the bimini, and to make sure that the splayed open part is pulled apart from the left and the right as you sew. Here Bill is checking the underside to make sure that everything is still where it needs to be and that he won't accidentally sew any portion of the intermediate pocket underneath. Here he's reached the other corner and he takes his time, splays the fabric apart, and tries to consistently feed it so that stitch is as straight as possible going down the length of this assembly. He's also sewing through that 1/2 inch tail on the underside, and here's what it looks like when we're done from the inside. Nice. Now, this portion of the video you won't have to worry about because you will have your binding and your zipper sewn onto the intermediate pocket. We forgot to do that. So here we're applying double-sided tape to both sides of this 1-inch binding, and then we will apply it to our intermediate pocket. We've already sewn on binding on the straight long side. But this is a good way to apply binding where a binder attachment cannot be used. So here we're basting it in place. We're going to skip ahead here because obviously you don't need to see what we're doing to correct our mistake. You will not make this mistake since we've indicated earlier in the previous chapter that you need to sew binding and the zipper on the intermediate pocket. Let's move on. Does your bimini require a backstay slit? If so, keep watching. If not, skip this chapter. If your bimini includes a backstay slit, we like to measure from the center location where we expect that backstay to come and rest in our bimini. We mark that position and we will measure up to how deep we think that backstay slit will rest within our bimini. You'll need to do this when you're patterning on the boat. Determine where the backstay slit is. Oftentimes it's cut into the pattern material. Our backstay slit will come through at about 10 inches, so we're adding at least 2 inches. Here we're being a little bit liberal and adding about 4 inches there, so that if we're off a little bit, the backstay can still rest within that area. So that's our stop point at the top. Then we'll measure over 2 inches from that line we struck down where we expect the backstay to come through. So 2 inches on each side of the line equals a total of 4 inches. We will notch the fabric with the Sailrite edge hot knife, not going deeper than 1/4 inch at all 3 of those locations, the 2 sides and the center location where the slit will actually be made. We have to accommodate for the backstay slit in the pocket as well, so we lay that pocket on top of that edge at the center location so the notches are matched up. Then we find the notches we just made for the backstay slit and transfer those locations to the pocket itself, or sleeve, sometimes referred to as pocket or sleeve. It's at those marks that are 2 inch away from the center, that we need to actually slit the pocket material. So here he's marking the pocket on those marks 2 inches away from the slit in the middle. So this 4-inch section of material will be cut away with the Sailrite edge hot knife. Don't accidentally cut your Bimini top. We have a metal ruler underneath this cut line so that we can cut it with a hot knife without damaging the Bimini top. So here we're cutting away the 4 inches of material at the backstay location. An extra zipper and a zipper slider is not included with the Bimini skin kits for a backstay slit. You would need to order that plus vinyl material. At the end of this video there is a full detailed materials list suggesting the things that you'll need for each backstay slit. Now the ends of that pocket can be bound again with the binding. We're using the 1-inch swing away binder to do that, just like we did for all the other pockets. Up next, we'll baste the zippers to the pockets, or what sometimes is referred to as sleeves. Our aft pocket includes a backstay slit, so it's cut into 2 sections. We're now going to prepare and baste our zippers onto the pocket. If you do not have a backstay slit, your pocket would be one continuous piece. The zipper will be basted to the side that has the writing on the pocket, in other words, the Sout and the Pout writing on it. So here he's applying the seam stick on the flange of the zipper so that when it's basted down, it'll be basted on the side with the writing. And since he's going to have to cut the zipper to a specific length, he's going to break the basting tape here with his fingers and then cut off the excess zipper. Because the zipper is cut down in size, it doesn't really matter where the slider is resting or where the pole is, because we're going to have to reapply it to that zipper anyway. He finds it easier to baste the zipper on with the zipper down on the table and the pocket on top, so the Sout is facing the tabletop and the zipper will go underneath the pocket at that location, keeping the teeth up against the binding that we sewed on previously. At the curved edge, there'll be a little bit of a wrinkle effect that takes place in the zipper flange there because of the shape. Whether your pocket is split into 2 sections for a backstay slit or more, or if it's a continuous pocket, you will still have at least 2 zippers on a continuous pocket, because there'll be a split in the middle between the 2 zippers. So our kits come with 2 60-inch zippers to accommodate a pocket, whether it has a backstay slit or not. We'll go over that a little bit more in detail when we cover the forward pocket, which is in this same chapter coming up next. The first zipper is attached to the port side of the aft pocket. Now we're attaching the second zipper to the starboard side of the aft pocket. Same procedure. The zipper is basted to the same side that has the writing on it, so the Sout is facing down towards the table. When we get to the portion that has a lot of curve in it, now the curve is transferred to the pocket and the flange stays fairly straight, just because of the way that it is basted in place. There we go. That was our aft pocket. Now we're going to work on the forward pocket, and the forward pocket for us is one continuous piece. There is no slit in it, but it will still contain 2 zippers. Here's our center location, and we've transferred that mark to the bound edge or the binding edge, and Bill uses 2 fingers to mark 2 fingers away from the center location on the edge that includes the binding. Now he'll use one of the 2 zippers that are included for this pocket, and he will prepare the basting tape on it so that he can baste it in position. Remember, it is basted on the side with the writing. for our situation, pout on this side since we're working on the port side. Here he indicates where he will cut the zipper and where he will apply the basting tape. The slider is down, even though he's going to cut off the slider, and he'll have to reinstall it later. We will run through this rather quickly since the process is done exactly the same as it was for the aft pocket. He will apply basting tape and then he will baste it to that side of the pocket right at the mark that he made about 1 to 2 inches away from the center location. Since he's going to flip the pocket, he's going to transfer the marks he made, which are about 1 to 2 inches away from the center location, so he knows exactly where that zipper should be basted on the other side of that pocket. Zipper goes down on the side with the writing, but it's easier to baste it with the writing facing the tabletop, so you can see where the teeth are and where the binding is coming up against them, just like we did previously. Then the second zipper is installed at the other mark, doing the same process. Zippers are basted, it's time to sew them down. Utilizing the Sailrite Ultrafeed Sewing Machine LSZ, we're going to move the needle to the right position. We find it easier to sew zippers with the zipper up against the right portion of the foot. We do not have a roping zipper foot installed here, only the standard foot that the machine comes with, but that makes the stitch fairly close to the teeth, just like we want it. We don't want it too close because it makes the puller or slider hard to move. So here we're just sewing down the length of the teeth just like we did for the intermediate pocket. This is the aft pocket, so it includes the backstay slit, so it only has one zipper attached to it since we had to split the pocket into 2 sections. Now, you may not notice it, but we're out of bobbin, so we're not sewing here. We ran out of bobbin. So what we have to do is insert a new bobbin. Having this happen is not a big deal. You can easily install another bobbin and just start where you left off. So here we're going to replace that bobbin. Now if you know that you're going to run out of bobbin fairly soon, you may want to check before you sew anything of length. That way you won't have to do this. But again, if it happens, no big deal. Here Bill is inserting another bobbin and he puts the tail of the bobbin thread underneath the machine and will feed or rotate the balance wheel up until it grabs that bobbin thread. Then simply sew over the previous stitches by about 1 inch or so, do a little bit of reversing, and continue to sew. When he reaches the end, make sure you do a few turns of a reverse so that that zipper is securely bound in place. And if you'd like, you can use a hot knife to carefully burn the ends of the polyester thread and push on it with your fingers to create a mushroom head. This looks nice and it also seals those threads nicely. But be warned, if you touch the fabric with the hot knife, it may burn it. We're now starting another zipper. Notice the zipper still on the right side of the presser foot, because that's where we like to sew zippers with the Sailrite Ultrafeed LSZ sewing machine. Sailrite Bimini kits come with a polyester thread, which is UV resistant but not UV proof. A polyester thread in a tropical environment may only last 2 to 3 years. In a non-tropical environment, it may go 5 to 8 years. If you'd like a thread that is UV proof, choose a PTFE thread. At the time of this filming, Sailrite carries 2 brands, Tanara, which is great for a rotary hook machine, and Profilin, which is great for an oscillating hook sewing machine like the Sailrite Ultrafeed sewing machines. This pocket contains 2 zippers, and we did some reversing on the last zipper and then skipped over to the second zipper, and we'll do some reversing here as well, and we'll sew down its length. Notice that at the starter box we have to position the presser foot slightly cocked or crooked, and then when we get to the teeth we straighten it out, because there's no room to sew next to that starter box without a little bit of a cant in the presser foot. On the side that will be visible, you will see 2 stitches, as seen here. These stitches are white, mainly because that's what comes in the kit. If you'd like to change the color of your thread, be sure to ask when ordering your Bimini skin kit, or if you'd like to change to a PTFE thread. We're glad to make accommodations to fit your requirements. We'll start with the aft portion. We need to sew the tail and the sleeve on. Finding the hang-down piece, which is a 6-inch rectangle, equal to the length of the side plus a few inches, we will fold it directly in half and crease it well. We're folding it along its length. Then we will open it up and apply double-sided tape, seam stick for canvas, right next to that creased mark we made in the center and on the outer edge of one of the sides. We'll peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue, and then fold it in half, basting it securely to itself. This now makes our hang-down tail a 2-layer assembly, giving it some stiffness and also making it a great tail for our Bimini. Again, for more sticking power, use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler or something similar to baste those panels together securely. You'll notice that after basting there's a slight curve in the hang-down tail. We want to use the edge that does not have the fold as our seam edge, so its curve will match the general shape of the curve of the panel edge when it's sewn to the top. Now's probably a good time to go back and look at your paper mock-up that you made to see how things are assembled, though we are going to explain it in detail here anyway. Here we're taking our hang-down tail and finding the center location of it by folding it in half. It's marked with a soapstone pencil at that location. At the edge that it does not include the fold but the raw edges that are basted together, we will cut a notch not going deeper than a 1/4 inch to indicate where the center is. Along that edge, the raw edges which are folded together, not the folded edge, we will apply seam stick for basting tape starting at the center position. We will apply it to both sides of that edge, the top side and the bottom side. We will also apply double-sided tape down the other side. We started in the center and we have a break in the center because we're going to sew on half of this panel at a time, just like we did when we sewed the center seam, joining the aft and forward panels together. We're installing this hang-down tail to the aft edge of our Bimini. We want to line up the center mark with the center mark in the top and don't accidentally get it lined up with the backstay marks. Now we'll baste half of that tail down starting at the center position and working our way out to the edge. Any excess basting tape on the underside sticking over the edge should be removed. Your tails should hang over the edge slightly. Do not cut them at this point. We'll do that later on. Next, we'll remove the transfer paper on top of that tail, revealing the glue. And we'll do this to the halfway point, the center line. Our aft edge includes a backstay slit, so our pocket's slit in 2 sections. Be sure to put the port side on the correct side, in other words, pout and pout. Line up the end of the tail with the mark we made that was 2 inches away from the slit for the backstay. Then baste all the way to the end, matching up the edges as you go. The pocket will be about 2 inches shorter than the actual Bimini top, and there'll be excess basting tape on the tail. Remove that up to the pocket. As always, apply pressure to the assembly, basting it securely in place. Here we're using the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler yet again. We'll position the deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide over top of the 1/2 inch mark on the needle plate. In other words, our stitch will be a 1/2 inch from the edge of the fabric. We'll start at one end of this assembly sewing the Bimini top, the tail, and eventually the pocket, which is 2 inches away from this end. And we're keeping that stitch a 1/2 inch from the raw edge using the deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide. We will sew all along this edge all the way to the center location and stop there. Basically where we stopped basting the assembly together. These look like our center marks, but they're actually the backstay slit marks. Here is our center mark. No need to do reversing. We will do reversing with the next stitch after it is basted together. Now we'll take it back to the table and baste the other half, just like we did the first half. Since the process is the same, we're going to go through this rather quickly. Next, we'll baste the starboard side, or sout side, of the tail, and then the starboard side of the pocket. Here we're basting the starboard pocket in place. Here's our center line, and also the end of that pocket will be on top of our line that was 2 inches to the starboard side of our backstay slit. Markings on pockets are always facing up, so you'll notice the sout is facing Bill as he bastes it to the Bimini top. Now we can take this over to the sewing machine and sew its side down just like we did the first. We're starting at the opposite end. This is the starboard side for our panel. Do some reversing at the beginning and sew down its length to the center position and do some reversing at the end. We will not show this whole process since we've already done it once before. We need to sew the entire sleeve down its length. And notice that we are past the center position, and that's quite okay because that sleeve needs to be secured down thoroughly all the way to the end since the backstay slit goes beyond the center position. Next comes the top stitch. It's always a good idea to check to make sure that you have a bobbin that will complete the stitch. If you do not, like we don't here, it's a good idea to change it now because we don't really want any reversing showing up on our top stitch. We'd like it to be one complete stitch from starboard to port. Same process like we did for the center seam, a semi-flat felled seam. In other words, this stitch is an 1/8 inch away from our splayed portion of our fabric assembly where we created the first stitch. The 1/2 inch flap is folded towards the Bimini top, not towards the tail. So as he sews down this length, he's being careful to pull on the tail and also the pocket so it is splayed out nice and neat along that first stitch. Do some reversing at the beginning to lock your stitch in place and then carefully guide the sewing machine or guide the stitch along that splayed open portion of this assembly. It's more difficult to do it at the edges or the turns than it is at the straightaway, so take your time here. At this turn there's a lot of bulk fabric here, wrinkles I should say, that have to be worked out before we get up to them and sew. That's because there's a lot of shape here because of the curve, so you can expect the same. Work them very slowly out as you sew, keeping that stitch as nice and straight as possible because this stitch will be very obvious on the Bimini. Here's a little sewing hint. To keep your stitch nice and straight, do not make quick adjustments while you are sewing. Instead, keep your hand or hands on the fabric assembly, guiding it as straight and as smoothly as possible, sewing a small section at a time. Then stop sewing, and now you can readjust your fabric and hands for the next small section of stitching. It's kind of like shooting a gun. If you're not a hunter, then don't let this statement offend you, but it is true. You do it steadily, and you do not make adjustments as you are squeezing the trigger. Doing this, you will hit your mark. It's the same way with sewing. Here Bill is sewing over the portion of this pocket that has the backstay, and he checks to make sure that the 1/2 inch tail is tucked towards the Bimini top and the pocket is not under any of his sewing area. He's in good shape. He'll continue to sew through. We are no longer at the straightaway. Here we're at the other side, which has a lot of shape. So he works out the wrinkles, pulling the fabric from left and right, and sews through that. And then at the end, he does some reversing to lock the stitch in place. Turn the assembly over, and here's what the underside looks like. Very similar procedure for the forward tail and sleeve, but this time we're going to do a tuck-down tail. We will now apply basting tape to one of these tuck-down tails in an effort to baste them both together. At corners where basting tape is applied, you can expect a few wrinkles in the basting tape. We're using the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to press the basting tape down firmly in place and also smash down those wrinkles. We'll apply basting tape to both long edges. These two tails have shape in them, but the shape matches each other. But starting at the end is difficult. So here we'll start at the center location and baste away from the center location in both directions. This way we find it easier to match up the shape as we baste the two halves together. After it's basted together, use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler or something similar to make sure that it's basted well. The more pressure you put on the basting tape, the better it sticks to this umbrella marine grade fabric. Now we'll put the Bimini on the table and work with the forward edge. On this edge we're going to install a tuck down tail and a pocket that has no backstay slits, so it's a continuous pocket from starboard to port. We will apply the basting tape to the hang down tail on the convex side of the tail. Just like we did before, the basting tape starts at the center notch and extends all the way to the side, and then we'll continue it from the center notch to do the other side. We also want to apply basting tape on the opposite side, on the same convex side of this tucked down tail. Since the process is done exactly the same as we showed for the opposite side, we're going to go through this rather quickly. We will baste down one side at a time in an effort to try to keep the basting tape stuck down as we take the entire assembly to the sewing machine to sew it. Since we made the tail a little bit longer than our Bimini top edge, we expect it to hang over the edge slightly, and as you can see it does. Now we will baste our pocket starting at the center position, following that same procedure. We remove the transfer paper from the double-sided tape, revealing the glue to that one half we basted down, and we start at the center position and baste all the way to the end that we basted, matching up the edges as we go. The writing on the pocket is facing up, the zipper's facing up, and the writing on the Bimini top is also facing up. The basting tape that's left exposed we can rip off. All the way to the end of the pocket. Next we'll sew it a 1/2 inch from the raw edge, and we'll use the deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide again, like a table saw's fence. When we get to the center position, we will stop sewing. Now we'll take it back over to the table again and baste the other half in the same manner. Baste the tail.
This hangs straight now.
Yes. Secure the tail. Baste the pocket. Secure the pocket. Sew it. When we reach the middle position where we ended sewing on our previous side, we will do some reversing here. If you've done it right, the stitches will be right on top of our previous stitches, which they are. We'll remove the magnetic guide, and now we'll concentrate on making our top stitch. But we want to check our bobbin first to make sure that we have a full top stitch without any breaks in the thread. The 1/2 inch flap is pointed back towards the Bimini top, so we're sewing through it on the underside. Next, we're going to sew the facing to the sides. We don't do it until now because it definitely helps to reduce the amount of bulk when sewing the tails and sleeves, so we'll do it now instead. Onto the facing strips, we'll apply double-sided tape to one long side of those facing strips. Do the same for the second facing strip. After the basting tape's applied to one long side, we will create a 1/2 inch hem, a single hem along that edge. Do that to both facing strips. Double-sided tape is applied on top of the 1/2 inch hem on that long side, and also on the underside where there is not a 1/2 inch hem, on the same side that we made the 1/2 inch hem. Do that for both strips. Okay. We will baste that facing strip with the 1/2 inch hem facing towards the bulk of the Bimini top. In other words, the inner edge. Remove the transfer paper, revealing the double-sided tape, and baste it along either the starboard or port side of the Bimini top. On the extreme ends, make sure there's a little bit of fabric hanging over that stitch there that secured the pocket and the tails. Do that on both sides. Since this facing strip is perfectly straight, a rectangle, and our skirt edge is not, at the center seam we will use a soapstone pencil and mark on top of the top stitch with that soapstone pencil. Then we'll put a metal ruler underneath it and cut it there on that mark with the Sailrite edge hot knife. We need to allow the facing strip to take a different turn at the center location since the edge is not perfectly straight. So this allows us to still apply our facing strip evenly along the bottom edge of the Bimini top. If it's slightly off due to the shape, don't worry about it. We can trim it up later. Now there will be excess here at the seam where the pocket and the tails are sewn on. And all we need to do is lay it down so that it's basted nice and smoothly up to that point. At that locations, we will use our soapstone pencil again and determine where the edge of the fabric is and mark at that location. Then we will use the Sailrite edge hot knife with the metal ruler underneath and cut a little bit outside that mark so we can tuck it underneath the edge of the fabric. There we go. Do the same at the other end. We will not show that. Now we'll take this over to the sewing machine and we'll sew along the 1/2 inch hem. Right along that edge, about an 1/8 inch away from the folded edge. Doing some reversing here at the beginning to lock our stitch in place. Here we are coming to the center seam where the two portions of the facing have been slit, and we carefully guide that under the foot and continue to sew. We'll do that same thing to the opposite side as well. We will not be showing that. Before we go, let's take a look at a center seam where the facing was slit. Notice here it doesn't line up perfectly evenly because of that transition. So our goal is to match up the 1/2 inch hem at the top to make it look good. At the bottom edge it hangs over a little bit, but we'll be trimming that later on. So your goal, if that is the case for you, is to make the top edge look nice and smooth and transition evenly. Now we'll sew the pocket zippers to the Bimini top. To find the location of the zipper pockets, fold the sleeve or pocket back towards the Bimini top, starting at the center position. Fold it so it lays perfectly flat. In other words, pull a little bit on it so that the seam is nice and flat, and mark where the zipper flange rests on both flanges. So we have a zipper on the starboard and port side. So he labels the edge with the soapstone pencil there. Now we can fold that pocket back and take a measurement with a soft tape measure from the inner seam. This is the first stitch all the way to that mark, and we get 6 5/8 inch. Let's measure the position of that second zipper as well that's a few inches away. It too is 6 5/8 inch. Now your measurements may be different. It all depends on your seam allowance and how you sewed it. But whatever your measurement, you now need to strike marks about every 4 to 5 inches apart. That distance is measured from the first stitch, the one closest to bill. These marks are measured up from that first stitch and should be laid in a parallel manner to the skirt's edge as you go along making the marks. This illustration shows the process in more detail. As you can see, we are measuring and marking as our tape is held parallel to the skirt's edge. We will continue marking about every 4 to 5 inches until we get to the side or the skirt edge. Here at the corner there's a lot of bulk fabric, so lay it flat and then measure up from that first stitch closest to bill parallel to the skirt's edge. The last mark should be on the facing strip right along that half-inch hem. So we'll position our last mark here at 6 5/8, just like we did everywhere else, right on the facing strip. Using a straight edge like this clear acrylic ruler that's available from Sailrite, we will strike a line to each mark, being sure that the ruler is directly on the mark, because the marks may not be perfectly straight down the entire length. So Bill is lining up the ruler between each of the marks that are 4 or 5 inches apart. When we get to the part that has a lot of shape in it, obviously those lines are not straight at all. So he's going to use the flexible curve ruler here and match up those marks to the ruler and then strike a line all the way to the skirt edge. This is the process you want to follow for each one of the zippers of your pocket. We will not show this again for the other end, and we will not show it for the other side of the bimini, but you would do the same thing there as well. Now we're going to take a seam stick for canvas and baste it on our zipper's flange so that we can baste it along that line. Start basting the zipper from the starter box and pin and baste it over our marked position that we marked earlier, and follow that line that we struck on the bimini top, being sure that the zipper's flange is directly on top of that line, being as careful as possible not to stretch the zipper and not to have any wrinkles in the canvas underneath the zipper. Now, when we get to the spot where there's a lot of shape, what Bill's going to do here is he's going to use 2 fingers and basically keep the pocket's edge about 2 fingers away from the skirt edge. Then he's going to use a straight pin and pin it at that location right through the zipper's flange into the facing edge. This will keep the end of the pocket where we want it to be as we work to baste down the zipper along the curved portion of the pocket. Due to the curved shape, we will have a few wrinkles in the zipper's flange. That is expected. Your job is to distribute the wrinkles over the entire curved section and to try to keep them small in size. We would rather have more very small wrinkles than a few large ones. Bill feels pretty confident that the wrinkles are distributed evenly at that curved transition. He's going to take the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler now and work them out even more. If you don't have that, use something similar to work out the wrinkles along that curved edge. Doing this, you'll notice removes almost all of the wrinkles, though they are still present. Sewing will also remove them even more. Any fabric that has to take a curve, if it's cut straight, like this zipper flange is, has to either shrink up or expand. In this situation, we have excess fabric because of the curve, so you will always end up with wrinkles unless the zipper were actually curved itself. But it's not, it's a straight piece.
Yeah, you just start in the center.
Now that that zipper is basted in place, we can take it to the sewing machine. We'll move our needle bar to the right so we get our stitch closer to the zipper's teeth. And here at the starter box, we will do some reversing here to lock our stitch in place. Notice that the presser foot is canted slightly because we are trying to sew as close to the starter box as possible, but yet obviously not, so that the starter box is under our presser foot. Then once we get past the starter box, we can straighten up our presser foot and ride the teeth with that right side of the presser foot, keeping our stitch nice and straight as we sew. Basting down this zipper, we did not use any match-up marks. Match-up marks can be convenient if the zipper comes unbasted from the bimini top, which it can because obviously seam stick does not like to stick to an acrylic fabric much, even though this is the best seam stick around for it. We will show using match-up marks in the next zipper just briefly. because that can be helpful if your zipper doesn't stay basted. Here there's a lot of shape, so notice Bill's pulling the Bimini top towards the sewing machine, and that zipper does want to come up. That's why match-up marks can be important. So he's ensuring that the zipper is still basted down along that line that he struck down, and he's carefully sewing here around this curve. Before he gets to that pin, since it's turned around so its head's facing the sewing machine, he needs to remove it. There we go. Now we can sew up to the facing's edge. Now he's going to try to stop exactly on top of those stitches, so he pulls up the zipper to tell where those stitches are on the facing's edge. This is just for looks. He likes to stop the stitch right on the edge and do some reversing there. He doesn't like to sew beyond it. But having the stitch go into that half-inch hem a little bit and stopping it directly on top of those stitches basically reinforces that zipper, because we're going through 3 layers of sunbrella canvas underneath. But he will go no further than this and do a few reversing forward and back to lock the stitch in place. And now that zipper is basted and sewn in place. We'll be following this process for all of the pockets, zippers, except for the intermediate pocket. We'll show that one in a different chapter because it's done a little bit differently. Now to do the next side, we're going to separate the 2 halves of the zipper that have been sewn down so we can follow that same procedure for the opposite side of the pocket's zipper, following that same procedure. So we will not show this in detail. Now what we do want to show is using match-up marks, and so that's what we're going to show in this portion of the video, because we did not do that with the first zipper, and it may have been helpful if your zipper had come undone while you were taking it to the sewing machine and sewing. So let's show just a little bit of this, and then we'll show using match-up marks. Here at the end, we will use 2 fingers away from the skirt edge, and the end of the pocket is pinned in place there. This time he's going to run the sharp point of the pin in towards the Bimini top, so he doesn't have to remove that pin as early as he did when he was sewing. He will distribute the wrinkles at the curved area as best as possible. And now he will use a soapstone pencil to mark about every 3 inches down the entire length of the zipper. Then he'll either use a number 2 pencil or a different pencil that shows up on the zipper's flange, marking directly across from the soapstone pencil marks he made. Now he can use those if the zipper accidentally comes unbasted from the top, so that we know exactly where the zipper should be remounted to the Bimini top. We will not show this sewing process, though we are starting at the end rather than at the starter's box. So here he started directly on top of those stitches, securing the facing edge, and he does some reversing here back into that first stitch he made right on top of those stitches. He's doing this for a pleasing look, so that the stitch does not go beyond the stitches that secured the facing's edge. When he gets to the starter box, he'll have to cant the presser foot slightly to get past it. Then he will do some reversing. In the reversing here, he is very careful and diligent not to sew into the single layer of sunbrella marine grade fabric. Why? Because we don't want to put a hole in only one layer of fabric. It is prone to leak more than any other needle hole if we do, so we try to avoid it whenever possible. We would follow that same procedure for the opposite side of the Bimini. This is a side that includes the backstay slit. Still, the same process, just bigger gap between the zippers. Let's move on. After all of your zippers are sewn in place, except for the intermediate pocket, we need to install the slider back on the end of the zippers. We will install the slider so that its fat end is facing the skirt edge, and install it on the side of the zipper that includes the starter box. Then we will zip up that slider, zip up the two halves of the zipper, and zip the puller almost to the end where the skirt edge is. And we will stop before it comes off, right at the end of the pocket. Now we will use scissors and cut the zipper so that it is flush with the end of the pocket, and then we will install zipper stops. So now we can pull the slider back because we have it cut where we want it to be, and we will pull it back a few inches. And now we'll install stainless steel zipper stops, which are included in the Bimini skin kits. We will install it either on the last tooth of the zipper or the second to the last tooth of the zipper. Oftentimes people install it on the second to the last and use that last tooth as a reinforcement for the zipper stop. But here Bill installed it on the last tooth. He'll do that to both sides. And what you want to do is just use needle nose pliers to bend the V portion of the stainless steel zipper stop around that zipper's tooth. We'll do this to the end of all of our zippers. We'll now attach the zipper for the intermediate pocket. It too is folded back upon the Bimini top, as seen here. Since the zipper's slider is installed, we will mark the zipper not at the slider, but approximately a ½ inch away from the slider along that zipper's flange on the top. Then we'll go to the other end, make sure the pocket is flat, and mark its zipper flange at that edge. We'll find that string that we used to measure the different release points of the pocket. The first mark and the second mark were the indicators for the middle of the Bimini frame at the center position. So we'll mark that distance going in towards Bill or towards the center seam from the mark that we just made on the fabric indicating where the flange of the zipper rests. This measurement is about 1 inch for us. Yours may be slightly different. And now we'll strike a line from those marks we made on the Bimini top. A straight line, straight across from mark to mark with the soapstone pencil. This approximate inch will allow for the tubing to run through the pocket without distorting the shape of the Bimini top. Here he marks where the starter box end rests, which should have been done earlier, but can definitely be done now. Now he'll move that zipper down to that new mark and the new line that we struck down, and he will base the zipper in place at that location. Now we'll base that zipper starting at the mark that we made where the zipper starter box, or the flange of that, should start. Match it up to that line we struck down all the way to the other end. Since the other end is not marked, we're going to make a match-up mark. So we use our soapstone pencil very close to the end of that pocket, and then another pencil to mark on the zipper's flange. That way, if the zipper comes up while we're sewing it, we know where it should stop. After securing it down, we're going to actually remove the pocket from the other half of the zipper so that it doesn't have any undue pressure on it when we take it to the sewing machine and sew it down. Bill scrolls up the end of the Bimini that will fit through the throat of the sewing machine. Using the Sailrite LSZ1 sewing machine, we have positioned the needle bar to the right to get closer to the zipper's teeth. If you're using an Ultrafeed LS1, the red machine, which is straight stitch only, the presser foot on the right side is smaller, so it will sew in about the same position as the LSZ-1 with the needle in the right position. So if using the Ultrafeed LS1, you don't have to worry about that. Here when we get to the end, we'll do some reversing right where the zipper stop is, because we don't need to really cut this zipper shorter, though we will be cutting off the excess fabric beyond that stop. So that's why we do reversing right across from that zipper stop. Now we'll cut off the excess with a Sailrite Edge hot knife, being sure not to cut the fabric underneath. That's why that ruler is on the bottom side. If your Bimini top includes a backstay slit, watch this next chapter. If not, skip it. This slit allows for an obstacle, like a backstay, to come through the Bimini top. We'll be putting our Bimini on the frame to test fit it and to also measure for the backstay slit. We need to remove the strapping tape and the strapping tape that has the double-sided tape on it. Here on the intermediate bow, remember we got some double-sided tape directly on the bows rather than on the strapping tape. And it is rather difficult to remove it if it's not on the strapping tape. So that's why we recommend always putting the double-sided tape on the strapping tape rather than directly to the bow. From frame to Bimini on the frame. At the backstay slit, we'll measure from the edge of the tail all the way to the stop point. Ours is 16 inches. When you're doing the test fitting, don't worry if there are a few wrinkles. Remember, we're only tensioning the Bimini with basically tape. When we make the webbing straps, it'll tension it much better, so it'll take out a lot of those wrinkles you may see when you're test fitting. Here we're using a 3-inch wide Sailrite vinyl strip, and we've cut it 2 inches longer in length than the measurement we took at the backstay slit from the tail to the stop point. If you look at both sides of the Sailrite, there is one shiny side and one dull side. On the 2 long sides, we're applying basting tape on the shiny side. We will then mark down the center length of that strip right in the middle with a grease pencil here because this is a vinyl fabric. The Bimini top's been removed from the frame, and now we'll find the stop point for the backstay. At that stop point, which is 16 inches for ours from the tail, we'll push a very small pin through that location. This gives us the ability to locate that position on the underside of the Bimini top. Now that we have that location, we can move the fabric so the outside surface is facing the tabletop below and mark the underside of the Bimini top with a soapstone pencil. Once it's marked, we can remove the pin. Now we're going to use a straight edge. Here we're using the clear acrylic ruler and strike a line all the way to the bottom and through the tail as well. Next, we'll take that vinyl strip and baste it in that location so that line we struck in the center on the dull side of this Sailrite vinyl strip is centered on the line we just struck on the Bimini top on the underside. So this vinyl strip is on the underside of the Bimini and it goes down so it's flush with the bottom edge of the tail. For this strip of vinyl, you could use a 3-inch wide naugahyde strip. Naugahyde would give you the ability to possibly come close to matching the Sunbrella Bimini top color. On the vinyl, we want to mark the stop position with a small T there. Now we can take this strip to the sewing machine and sew very close to that line we struck in the center of the vinyl strip, starting at the tail, doing some reversing. Our stitch should be about 1/8 inch away from that line we struck on the vinyl. And do this slowly and carefully, keeping your stitch as straight as possible as you sew alongside the line. The line that we struck on the vinyl will become a slit, so what we're doing is trying to sew as close as possible to that slit so it reinforces it in a future step. At the stop point, we will stop sewing and do some reversing there. Then we'll lift the presser foot and pull the material back to our start point, which is the tail, and sew down the opposite side, same distance from that mark we struck on the middle of the vinyl material. Do some reversing there at the tail and sew up to our stop point and do reversing there. At the end of this stitch, he wants to close off that very small T junction where we marked the stop. So he rotates the material around and scrolls it up underneath the arm of the sewing machine. He will bury his needle at the position where he wants to start sewing, and then he'll lower his presser foot and do a little bit of reversing here, moving very slowly because he does not necessarily want to sew past the 2 stitches that are on either side of the line we struck on the vinyl strip. Now we will make a zipper plaque. We will utilize some of the scrap fabric we used to make the Bimini top. Here we're using the clear acrylic ruler, and we want to make this strip 6 inches wide, and we want to make it our backstay slit measurement from tail to stop point plus 3.5 inches. We'll cut out that fabric with the Sailrite edge hot knife. On one of the short ends, we will measure up 2.5 inches and strike a line. On the other short end, on the same side, we will measure up 1 inch and strike a line. Now we'll fold this in half lengthwise, so those lines we just struck down are on the outside. We'll take this assembly over to the sewing machine and we'll place our needle in the center position and put our magnetic guide on the 3/4 inch line on the needle plate. So the stitch will be 3/4 of an inch from the magnetic guide. And we'll sew a straight stitch down the length of this assembly, right along the fold, 3/4 of an inch away from the fold, I should say. We're coming up to that line we struck on the material that's 2.5 inches from the end. We will sew past it by about an inch and then do some reversing back to it, and we will do that twice. So our reverse stitch is on the inside edge of the 2.5 inch line. And we will sew all the way to the end. We did not do any reversing at the beginning of the stitch, nor here at the end. Why didn't we do any reversing? Because we will eventually rip those stitches out up to the 2.5 inch location. But first we need to cut along the fold that we put in this assembly. This will splay the zipper plaque apart, and we will crease it well along that stitch that we just put in. That can be done with a Sailrite canvas patterning ruler, as we're doing here, or we can just use this assembly up against the edge of a sharp table and run it up and down the edge. We're using a YKK finished number 10 zipper here, and we're going to cut it a little bit longer than the entire assembly here, because we don't need the full length of this finished zipper. And then we will apply basting tape to both of the flange edges. The zipper starter box will start at the 1 inch location on your Sunbrella marine grade zipper plaque, and about a 1/2 inch above the line, that's 2.5 inches, we need to place another mark and cut the zipper yet one more time to the appropriate length. Then we're going to baste it on top of this splayed open portion that we just sewed together and slit down the fold. So we want to baste it in position so it's even with the edges. If you'd like, you can apply basting tape to the underside of the portion that we just basted the zipper down, and then press that firmly to the face of the zipper plaque. That keeps it nice and flat so you can sew it without it moving. We're going to do that on both sides. Then we're going to mark at the 2.5 inch location across the zipper's flanges, as seen here. We will now sew this zipper in place. Here Bill is determining where the stitch will go so that the presser foot is up against the teeth, and he moves the needle all the way to the right because this is the Ultrafeed LSZ1. He will start at the top of this assembly. This is the 2.5 inch mark that we placed on the zipper plaque, so he's starting on that end. And he will sew here, doing some reversing to lock the stitch in place, and then he'll sew all the way down so his presser foot is up against the teeth of the zipper. When he gets to the starter box, at the bottom edge of this zipper, he's going to have to cant the presser foot slightly to get past the zipper box. And it's not a bad idea to do some reversing on top of the zipper flange here. We did not do it here, but we highly recommend you do about 1 inch of reversing there, right beside the zipper's starter box. He does reversing at the bottom edge, which he definitely should do there as well. Because we like to sew zippers on the right side of the presser foot for the Ultrafeed LSZ1, we're going to start on the opposite end here, and we will follow that same procedure for securing the other side of the zipper to the zipper plaque. When he gets to the position where he's right beside the starter box, some reversing should be done there as well, though we do not do that here. That helps to reinforce that zipper because there will be quite a bit of stress at that location once this zipper plaque is done. So again, right here, he should do some reversing. We did not. Now sew all the way through and past and into the end of the zipper plaque and do reversing. On the end that has the 2.5 inch mark, he will fold it back so he can find where that mark would rest on the top side of this zipper plaque, and he marks it there. Then he will rip the stitches from the bottom edge where the tail will be all the way to that stop position, and he will stop there. That's where the reversing started when he originally made the stitches that secured that fold in the middle. The ripped up stitches can be removed by hand. The seam stick for canvas is applied along the two long edges on the same side that the zipper was sewn down to. Now we'll create a single hem using that seam stick as a basis to hold it in place, and the single hem edge should match up with the zipper's flange edge if it's done right. So we'll fold those back to the zipper flange, and we'll do that on both sides, which should result in a zipper plaque that is now 3 inches wide. On the side that does not have the starter box and starter pin, rip the zipper apart just by basically inserting your thumb on the underside and carefully pulling it apart as you go down to the starter box and pin, and separate the zipper there. Insert the slider that you removed with the puller facing up on the same side that the zipper was sewn to, and then start the opposite side of the zipper and pull the slider all the way close to the top but not quite there. Stop here. Next, we'll insert another single pull locking slider with its fat end going down. In other words, the fat end of the slider gets fed on the ends of the zipper so that it will match up when installed to the opposite slider. So they'll run into each other. Fat ends are facing each other. Now we'll sew the end of the zipper shut. Puts the needle bar in the center position. Then he will bury his needle into that first stitch, and then he'll lower his presser foot. He will stitch from stitch to stitch, the stitch on this side to the stitch on the opposite side, right at that mark that we made on the zipper. And when you sew across the teeth, be careful that you do not get a needle deflection, and you may have to help push the assembly underneath the presser feet. Once you sew through it, sew up to the previous stitch or the opposite stitch on the other side, and do some reversing back across those teeth as well. So here we're going to do this a couple times just to secure that zipper and to close up the end of the zipper so the sliders never come off. There we go. Now, let's take a look at see what it looks like on the other side. Not too bad. We'll cut those loose threads and that'll look better. Now we'll apply double-sided tape to the end of the 2.5 inch end. We applied 2 rows and fold it back to that line. Then double-sided tape is applied to the 2 long sides where the single hem was made. We'll go back to the Bimini now. The top side is facing up, and we'll feel for the vinyl patch that's underneath, and we'll mark the sunbrella fabric with a soapstone pencil, its location, so its corners. At the tail location, we'll also mark it there. Now we'll carefully baste it to the top, peeling off the transfer paper, revealing the glue, and then carefully baste it right over top of that patch, the vinyl patch on the underside. So we'll use those marks we just made on the canvas top to line this up. Pausing the video here, notice the pullers on the zipper. they'll be folded so they're directly on top of each other. It would be best if they were folded so one was forward and one was backwards, so there wouldn't be as much bulk at that location where the sliders rest. It has been basted right over the vinyl and secured down with our Sailrite canvas patterning ruler. We're ready to take it to the sewing machine and sew around the perimeter. We want to sew about an 1/8 inch from the outer edge of the zipper plaque. We do not want to miss the vinyl on the underside. If everything is positioned accurately, sewing an 1/8 inch from the folded edge of this zipper plaque will result in us sewing through both it and the vinyl on the underside. We started at the tail there, did some reversing, and we'll sew up to the corner. We will either turn the corner or we'll do some reversing and eventually finish off the short end after we are done finishing the two legs. Because we have the sliders polars on top of each other, there's quite a bit of bulk when we go by the zipper polars. If those slider polars were facing forward and facing back, we wouldn't have as much bulk there. Now here, let's see what Bill does. I think he does some reversing here. Yep, he does some reversing here to lock his stitch in place. Then he will later go back and finish the short end of the zipper plaque. So now he repositions his stitch again so it's sewing on the other side of the zipper plaque, following that same procedure to the short end. Bill's decided to leave his needle buried, lift the presser foot, and roll the assembly around so he can finish up the short end of the zipper plaque. Don't forget to lower your presser foot before you sew. Now we can take this back over to our table and we can carefully slit through the vinyl and through this umbrella that's directly under it. But do not cut the zipper. The zipper is under the sunbrella and the vinyl. Just carefully cut the vinyl fabric that has our lines struck through it and the sunbrella underneath it with a pair of scissors. Up to the stop point and stop short of that. Don't cut through your stitches there. Right there. When Bill splays this apart, you can see the zipper is directly under that. Now we're going to use the Sailrite edge hot knife and touch up the sunbrella edges to help keep them from unraveling. You will slightly touch the vinyl as well, and it will melt slightly, and that's okay. Here's what the backstay slit will look like when the Bimini is installed. The backstay would come between the two zippers, and they would zip up to the backstay. Trimming tails, and possibly the sides where the facing strips are, is next. We'll now be concentrating on the tails. We're going to unzip the zipper pocket so we can put the straight edge right along the edge, and we want to mark the tail right along that edge with the soapstone pencil. Now we're going to use a can, or you can use a cup, and make a gradual corner. Instead of a 90-degree corner, this is a gradual rounded corner, which will definitely make it easier for us to bind around the perimeter of our Bimini. If it were a 90-degree corner, we would have a difficult time turning this umbrella by us binding around the turn, but because they're gradual, it'll be fairly easy. Now here along the facing edge, we need to trim this up because it's not even there. So instead of doing a really sharp transition, we will take about 12 inches of transition and cut off that excess material because we want the binding to go on fairly consistently, and we do not want a all of a sudden major switch in the fabric. So that's why we're cutting at least about 12 inches back to transition that excess fabric and cut it away. Now that looks good. After all tails are trimmed, it's time to install the binding. To sew the binding around the perimeter, we're going to start at the backstay slit. So we're going to unzip the backstay, and we are going to feed that end into the 1-inch swing away binder with the 1-inch acrylic or sunbrella binding installed. And we'll start at the end and do some reversing, and then carefully feed our assembly into the fold of the binding, remembering to pay attention to the exiting point of the binder rather than the entry point of the binder when pushing your assembly up to the fold. And we will sew all around the entire perimeter. Now, if you do not have a backstay slit, you'll just have to start at, say, the aft end of the bimini in the middle position, and then when you get to the end, you'll have to sew over that end by an inch or so. Here at the corner, we push the corner into the binder, being diligent to concentrate on the exiting point of the binder so the assembly is pushed into the fold of the binding. When I say assembly, I mean fabric assembly. And once we get around that corner, we can continue to sew along the straight edge. This is the facing edge, or the starboard or port side. Don't know which. Uh-oh, notice we ran out of bobbin? We should have checked our bobbin before starting to sew around the perimeter. But don't worry, what we'll do is we'll leave the binding in place and also not cut the top thread. So watch what Bill does here. He just pulls the thread out of the binding because it doesn't have any bobbin stitch to hold it in place, and then he'll insert a brand new bobbin, leaving his thread threaded because he pre-wound some bobbins. So his bobbin's installed now, a new bobbin, and he will carefully pull the binding back to where he ended his stitching that it actually secured it to the bimini top. So see, he's pulled it almost to that point, and now he takes his thread and he will pull on his thread. Yeah, there we go. Good. We got a good shot of it up near the top of the sewing machine so it can be tensioned appropriately. Then he will bury his needle with the balance wheel. He's rotating the balance wheel by hand. Then he'll lower his presser foot and sew in reverse for about an inch or less. So here we go. And now he will sew forward. So we did not have to cut the binding, and we just have a very small reverse, which actually looks pretty good. We will have to cut some of the loose stitches on the underside, but that's no big deal. Here we are at the backstay slit on the opposite end, and we'll do some reversing there to lock the stitch in place. And our binding is sewn around the entire perimeter. We'll trim off the excess binding at the backstay slit and then use the Sailrite edge hot knife to touch up the ends of the binding to keep it from unraveling. The bimini top is now complete. However, we still need to install our strap eyes. Those are attached to the frame so we can tension the bimini. To install the strap eyes, Bill's going to collapse the frame on top of itself. We'll remove all this strapping tape that was used to secure the frames in an upright position. We're going to install our strap eye about 2 inches down from our skirt line that we indicated or marked on the frame. So here it is, 2 inches down from the skirt line. When you install your bimini, it is likely that it will rest a little bit above the skirt line because it's typical for the bimini to shrink up a little bit when it's sewn. And here we're using the drill steady tubing tool, and we insert our threading oil into that hole. And we'll use an 1/8 inch drill bit. Here we're going to put some carpet underneath the bows just because we're going to apply a lot of pressure down on the bows and we don't want to scratch them up. Here's the 1/8 inch drill bit, drilling on top of that 2 inch mark down from the skirt edge. And we are directly on top of the bows. So our strap eye will be facing towards the stern, directly towards the stern, or directly towards the bow, depending on which side it's installed in. Now we can remove the drill steadying tubing tool. Now we need to enlarge the hole for the rivet. We're going to use a size number 20 drill bit for this. Lubricating your drill bit or the hole prolongs the life of the drill bit. These strap eyes and these stainless steel rivets are included with the Bimini frame kits. We've inserted a rivet in the hole that we just made, and we position the strap eye so we can mark the tubing. And we're just using some masking tape there to mark the tubing easily for the insertion of the second hole. We will follow that same procedure. We will not show all of this since it's done in exactly the same way. Bill's going to wipe away the markings that he made on the tubing with the permanent marker, and now he will insert the strap eye with its 2 rivets in those holes that he just made. Because they're stainless steel rivets, they're a little bit hard to set, but using a good riveting tool will usually accomplish the task. Be sure to wear eye protection, as the mandrel may shoot out of the riveting tool. We're going to show installing one completely, in other words, not making any cut to the video, to show you how much pressure is required and how many times you probably will have to squeeze it before the mandrel breaks. There we go. Now we'll do that for the second one. And obviously we cut through some of the video in here. There's the second one installed. A strap eye is installed on the primary bow and the secondary bow on the outer portion of it, 2 inches below the skirt edge. And now we can attach our adjustable webbing strap and use that to tension the bimini top and our frame. Click the link at the top right if you'd like to see a video on how to make an adjustable webbing strap for a bimini or a dodger. The supplies to make this adjustable webbing strap are included in the Bimini skin kits. It's now time to install the Bimini. Our bows are installed on a wooden platform. You may want to remove the hardware and bows and install them on your boat, then install the Bimini. It's your choice. Now we can zip our Bimini top, which is now completed, to the frame structure and start to tension it. As you attach the strap eyes and before adjusting them, be sure to pull the Bimini to the starboard or port side so that it is an equal distance from the skirt line that we marked on the bow with a permanent marker. Once the straps are tensioned, you should have a Bimini that looks great with few wrinkles. Our Bimini is tensioned fairly hard. In fact, you can see that the wood boards are warped slightly because we have it under a great deal of tension. Once the Bimini frame is mounted to the boat, we will no longer have to worry about the boards warping as we tension each one of these webbing straps, so we'll be able to apply a lot more tension. We left the skirt lines on the bows for now so that we can position the Bimini so that it is an equal distance from them. Later on, we'll remove those marks completely. Bimini skin kits can be ordered from Sailrite. These are the materials and the tools that we used to make this Bimini top. Most of the materials list found here is included in the Bimini skin kit, and some components are in the Bimini frame kits. If you'd like to make modifications to the Bimini skin kits or even the Bimini frame kits, be sure to give us a call or email us. We're glad to make modifications to any of the kits. The materials required for a Backstay Slit are not included in any of the kits, so here's a list of the materials that you'll need to order for each Backstay Slit. Our Bimini top is now ready for use. Our frame was installed on a wooden platform to make it easier for patterning and building the Bimini top. Now we'll remove the frame and the hardware on the frame and take it to the boat and mount it on that. Here are some of the related videos that have to do with building a Bimini. They may be helpful in your next DIY project. It's your loyal patronage to Sailrite that makes these free videos available. For more free videos like this, be sure to subscribe to the Sailrite YouTube channel or check them out at sailrite.com. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.